I think one of the most common things we hear from folks is really wanting to have like a richer English vocabulary, words that really come to mind when they need them. So today we're going to be taking a deep dive into a collection of advice that we found actually 15 distinct techniques that go way beyond just, staring at those word lists. We really want to break it down into really powerful, actionable strategies that you, the listener, can start using right away to really see some serious growth in your word power.
Yeah, and the source material we've been diving into here is a fantastic, really engaging guide. It really gets at that frustration that a lot of folks have when they learn new English words and they feel good about it and then poof, they vanish. But the nice thing about this guide is that it's not just like, try harder. It really gives you like a toolbox, a bunch of practical methods, whether you're just starting out learning English or you're already pretty advanced and you're just looking for that extra edge.
Okay, so let's just jump right in. One of the first things that really stood out to me was this emphasis on learning vocabulary in context. So instead of just seeing abandon equals to leave, they highlight the power of seeing it in a full sentence. The sailors had to abandon the ship during the storm. So why is this method of seeing a word in its natural habitat so much more effective than just memorizing definitions in isolation?
So think about it this way. Your brain is kind of like a detective, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, isolated words are kind of like a fingerprint without a crime scene, right? So context, that's the crime scene, right? And it allows your brain to piece it all together, like the meaning and remember it better. So when you see that word abandon in the sentence about the sailors, right? You're not just getting a definition. You've got the word sailors and ship and storm, right? They all kind of paint this picture. So your brain starts to understand, not just what abandon means, but why and how it's used, right? So it's like your brain is learning the words role in a little story, which makes it way more memorable.
That's a great analogy. I like that. It really highlights how the surrounding words, they really give meaning and life to that new vocabulary that you're trying to learn. The next tip kind of builds on this idea of engaging your brain visually, and it's use visual flashcards. They recommend using apps like Inky or Quizlet and adding a picture to each card. It can even be something personal, like your favorite pizza next to the word delicious. So how does adding that visual, especially a personal one, like really supercharge the effectiveness of flashcards?
Well, think about this. Our brains are really good at remembering images, right? So when you pair a word with a visual, you're essentially creating like a second pathway for your brain to access that information. But when you make that image personal, like that pizza, you're layering in an emotional connection, right? You remember how that pizza tasted. You remember, how happy you were eating it. And that emotion, it acts like glue. It makes that connection to that word delicious much stronger and easier to recall. So it goes beyond just, visual recognition to something, deeper.
Yeah, I love that, turning vocabulary learning into like a much more multisensory experience. The next point is something that we, talk about often on the show, and it's read more but choose what you love. Whether it's comic books or blogs about your hobbies or thrilling novels, they really emphasize that genuine enjoyment is the key. When you're actually enjoying what you're reading, your brain seems to, just soak up these new words much more easily. So why is that enjoyment factor so crucial for vocabulary acquisition?
It comes down to engagement,
Sure.
and reducing what we call cognitive load, right? So when you're reading something that you find interesting, your attention is captured naturally, right? You're not fighting to stay focused, which frees up mental energy. And this relaxed but attentive state is ideal for learning, right? You encounter new words organically, within a context that you already enjoy. It doesn't feel like a chore, so your brain is much more receptive to absorbing new information almost effortlessly.
Absolutely. It's shifting learning from being a task to being a pleasant byproduct of something you're already doing for fun. Next up is speak the words out loud. They suggest actively practicing new words by creating your own sentences or even just talking to yourself. It might feel a little silly, but how does physically saying the words help with getting them to stick in our memory?
Think about it this way. When you speak a word, you're engaging like a whole different set of senses and motor skills, right? You're not just seeing it or thinking it. You're using your vocal cords. You're hearing the sound of your own voice, and you're feeling physical movements involved in pronunciation. So this added layer of sensory input, it creates a much more robust, multifaceted memory trace in your brain. And it also forces you to actively produce the word, which is a much deeper level of processing than simply just recognizing it, right?
That makes total sense. It's the difference between, passively listening to music and actually trying to sing along, You're much more engaged when you're actively participating. The next tip is make it personal. This encourages us to connect new words to specific events or feelings in our own lives, like linking achievement to a personal triumph, like graduating from college was a huge achievement for me. So how does this personal connection act as an anchor for new vocabulary?
Well, our brains are wired to prioritize and remember information that's personally relevant to us, right?
Yeah.
So when you tie a new word to a specific memory or a significant event or a strong emotion in your own life, you're creating a really powerful, unique link, right? It becomes part of your personal narrative, which makes it much more accessible and easier to recall later on. It's no longer just an abstract word, it's tied to your own story.
That's a really powerful way to think about it, like weaving these new words into the fabric of our own experiences. The next technique is use mnemonics, those clever memory tricks that help us recall words, like remembering gregarious, meaning sociable, by associating it with a friend named Greg who's very outgoing. So why are these seemingly random or even silly associations so effective at helping us remember?
What's fascinating about mnemonics is that they tap into our brain's natural inclination for patterns and rhymes and even humor. So these techniques essentially, create an artificial but very memorable bridge between a word and its meaning. And then the more unusual or even ridiculous the association, the more likely it is to stick in your memory because it stands out, right? It's like giving your brain a little hook to hang that new word on, making it easier to retrieve later.
I can definitely attest to that. The more outlandish the mnemonic, the better I seem to remember it. The next tip is about keeping a vocabulary journal, a personalized space, either physical or digital, where you record new words along with not just definitions, but example sentences, synonyms, and even little doodles. So how does this active process of recording and customizing enhance our vocabulary learning?
Well, think about it. Simply reading or hearing a new word, it's a passive activity, right?
Yeah.
But when you take the time to write it down, to craft your own sentence using it, to look up related words, even to add a visual element, you're actively engaging with the word on multiple levels. Mm-hmm. And this active engagement really reinforces its meaning and usage in your mind. Plus, by personalizing your vocabulary journal, you're creating a unique and therefore more memorable learning resource that really reflects your own learning style.
It becomes a tangible record of your progress, almost like a treasure trove of your growing word power, which must be really motivating. The next point is learn synonyms and antonyms, expanding your understanding of a word by exploring words that have similar and opposite meanings, like learning joyful, cheerful, ecstatic, and miserable when you learn happy. So how does this web of related words strengthen our grasp on vocabulary?
Our brains don't store words in isolation. They're all connected in this vast network of meaning. So when you learn synonyms and antonyms, you're essentially strengthening and expanding those connections.
Right.
So you're not just learning individual words. You're understanding how they relate to each other within this broader landscape of the language, right? And this deeper understanding not only improves your comprehension, but it also gives you more options when you want to express yourself precisely.
That's a great way to put it, like building a richer and more nuanced understanding of the language. The next technique focuses on practice with real conversations, suggesting we seek out opportunities to speak English with native speakers or language partners, maybe through apps or something like that. Why are words that we actually use in real conversations more likely to become a permanent part of our vocabulary?
There's this unique element of active recall and real-time application that happens in a conversation, right? You have to quickly retrieve and use the vocabulary that in a spontaneous and meaningful way to communicate effectively. And this active use, combined with that immediate feedback that you get from your conversation partner, it really solidifies your understanding and memory of those words. It's a much more dynamic and engaging way to learn than passive study.
The pressure of having to come up with the right word in the moment, I think definitely forces your brain to work harder and to recall what you've learned. The next tip is watch shows with subtitles, recommending that we use, English language shows and movies as a learning tool, suggesting that we pause, note down new words, and then try rewatching without subtitles. So how effective is this kind of stepped approach to learning through video?
It's a really smart way to leverage entertainment for language learning. Initially, watching with subtitles provides that crucial comprehension and exposes you to new vocabulary in a natural, contextualized way. And then that active step of pausing and making a note of unfamiliar words, it shifts the process into a more focused learning mode, right? And then finally, rewatching without subtitles becomes, a valuable test of your recall and listening comprehension. Reinforcing the newly learned vocabulary in a more challenging and ultimately more effective way.
It's like providing a scaffold for your learning and then gradually taking that support away as you become more confident. The next technique delves into break words into roots, understanding prefixes, suffixes, and root words to unlock the meaning of multiple words at once, like knowing that tele means distance, which helps you understand telephone, television, and telescope. So how does this understanding of word parts contribute to vocabulary growth?
Well, think about it as learning the building blocks of the English language. Many English words share common roots that are derived from Latin and Greek. So by understanding these fundamental components, you gain the ability to decode the meaning of countless unfamiliar words. It's like learning a linguistic code that can unlock, vast amounts of vocabulary. So instead of having to memorize each word individually, you learn a system that allows you to infer meaning, making vocabulary acquisition much more efficient.
That's incredibly efficient. It's like learning the alphabet of words, which then allows you to read and understand so many more. The next tip is use it daily, challenging us to actively incorporate new vocabulary into our everyday communication, whether that's writing emails, texting friends, or even just talking to ourselves in English. So how vital is this consistent active application for making new words truly stick?
It boils down to the principle of use it or lose it, right? Our brains prioritize information that we use regularly. So by consciously making an effort to weave new words into your daily conversations, your writing, and even your internal thoughts, you're signaling to your brain that these words are important and need to be retained. And this active use moves the words from your passive vocabulary, words you might recognize, to your active vocabulary, words that you can confidently use yourself.
It's about making a deliberate effort to integrate these new words into the fabric of your existing language use. The next point is a reassuring one. It's don't be afraid to make mistakes. They emphasize that errors are a natural and an inevitable part of language learning, and that perseverance is key. Yeah. So why is having this mindset of embracing mistakes so crucial for expanding our vocabulary?
Fear of making mistakes can be a significant roadblock in language learning, right? It can make you hesitant to speak or write, which limits your opportunities to practice and use new vocabulary. So by reframing mistakes as valuable learning experiences rather than as failures, you cultivate a more positive and growth-oriented mindset, and this encourages you to take risks, to experiment with new words, and ultimately to learn more effectively without the paralyzing fear of imperfection.
That's such an important reminder. It takes the pressure off and allows for more natural exploration of the language. The next technique is turn vocabulary into a game, suggesting we utilize language learning apps, spelling challenges, or word games, like Wordle or Scrabble. So how does this element of gamification enhance the learning process?
Well, games are inherently engaging, and they often tap into our intrinsic motivation. They typically incorporate elements like challenges and rewards and a sense of progress, which can make learning feel less like a tedious task and more like a fun activity, right?
Yeah.
And this increased engagement can lead to greater focus and higher motivation levels and ultimately better retention of new vocabulary because you're enjoying the process.
Absolutely, a bit of healthy competition, or the simple satisfaction of solving a word puzzle can be surprisingly effective at keeping you motivated. Finally, the last tip is review, underscoring the critical role of regular review for long-term memory, and specifically mentioning the power of spaced repetition. So, why is this method of reviewing at increasing intervals so much more effective than just trying to cram everything in at once?
Well, spaced repetition is so effective because it aligns with the natural way our memory works. When you first learn something new, the memory trace in your brain is relatively weak, and it will fade over time if not reinforced. So reviewing helps to strengthen that trace. However, reviewing too soon after learning something doesn't really provide much benefit. So spaced repetition involve revisiting material at increasing intervals, just as you're on the verge of forgetting it. And this forces your brain to actively retrieve the information from memory, strengthening those neural connections each time, and leading to significantly better long-term retention. So it's about optimizing the timing of your review to maximize its impact.
So it's about strategically reminding your brain of the new words just before they slip away, which sounds like a really efficient way to learn. That's a fantastic collection of strategies, and hopefully you, the listener, are already thinking about how you can incorporate some of these into your own learning routine. Just to quickly recap some of the key takeaways, learning in context, gives you that richer understanding. Visual flashcards add that emotional depth. Reading for pleasure makes learning enjoyable. Speaking aloud activates more of your brain, and making it personal creates those strong memory anchors.
Yeah, and remember the power of mnemonics for those tricky words, keeping a vocabulary journal for that active engagement, exploring synonyms and antonyms for a deeper understanding, practicing in real conversations for practical application, breaking words into roots for efficiency, using new words daily to solidify them, embracing mistakes as learning opportunities, gamifying your learning for fun, and consistently reviewing using spaced repetition for that long-term retention. It's all about moving from that passive memorization to active engagement with the language in diverse and meaningful ways.
Exactly. Building a strong vocabulary isn't a quick fix. It's a journey. But by consciously applying these techniques, you can definitely make significant progress, and more importantly, truly make those new words your own.
Considering all of these diverse techniques, what if the most effective path to a richer vocabulary isn't about these grueling study sessions, but about cleverly and creatively weaving new words into the fabric of your everyday life and your existing passions? How might you, the listener, experiment with combining several of these methods? Maybe linking visual flashcards to intriguing words that you encounter in your favorite podcast, and then consciously trying to use them in conversations with friends. Just crafting a truly personalized and enjoyable learning experience that allows those new words to not just be learned, but to truly become a part of you.